Welcome to the Family Milk Cow podcast, where in every episode I cover topics that equip you with the skills and know-how to look after your girls in the barn. Family milk cows are more than just livestock. They are a part of our families. They deserve the best care possible from knowledgeable and responsible owners. So pull up a chair or your milk stool and let's dive into another episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Wolf. I'm also from the blog and YouTube channel Rough and Tumble Farmhouse. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about what you should consider before you get a cow. Now, this is definitely kind of a more basic topic. We're going to dive into some much more complex topics in future episodes and future seasons, but I feel like this is such an important one to cover. I wanted to make sure we got it out of the way right away at the beginning of the first season. So I just have with me here a list of things we're going to go through. It's actually a fairly extensive list, but I think it's really important that, especially with the growing interest in family milk cows, that we make sure that you are prepared for what you're getting yourself into before you bring that cow home. So the first thing I want to make sure that you are doing is check and make sure you have a large animal veterinarian that will be willing to take care of your cow. There is a huge shortage, especially in rural areas, for large animal vets, and so it's very important that you have one on deck who is willing to take you on as a client. Because there's a shortage of them, just because there's a vet in your area doesn't necessarily mean they will actually be able to take care of you and fit you in, because a lot of times they are already kind of being run ragged. So please make sure that you have that large animal vet ready to go. It is always it's just heartbreaking when you see in the Facebook groups and things where people make a comment, they have a question, hey, my cow's got this thing going on. What do you think we should do? Any ideas? And then people will reply back, oh yeah, that's a vet call. That's definitely a more complex issue. And the original poster will say, oh, well, we don't have a vet that will come out here. And then that's kind of the end of the conversation, because if it's beyond the skills of even other experienced cow people, yeah, you need a vet for that, and you don't have a vet. It's sort of a good luck. We hope your cow makes it. And it's so terrible for the cow to be put in that position. And it's also difficult for you as the homesteader, farmer, cow owner to be in that position, because here you have an animal that you have certainly invested a decent amount of money in and time. And now this animal you might lose because you don't have a vet that will take care of them. So I'm so sorry that it's kind of tough love on that one. But if you do not have a vet who will come take care of your animal, then you should not be getting a milk cow. Then maybe you want to look into goats or sheep or something else if there's a vet that will see them and take care of them. But please don't get a cow if you cannot provide medical care for them when they need it. And I'm going to say when, because it is not an if. Even if you're taking the perfect care of your animal nutrition wise and you're keeping up on your fences and everything, animals get hurt, animals get snagged on things or cut on things, or they step on their own teat, or someone else steps on their teat, or whatever. They will need vet care at some point, and you need to be able to provide it. Okay, so sorry, that was a very, very serious one, but I'm very passionate about making sure animals have good health care. Okay, next thing on the list is making sure that you have the space for a milk cow. Now, sort of the old adage is that if you have an acre of good solid pasture, you can graze a cow and her calf, or 5 ewes and their lambs. And I think that actually is fairly close to what I would consider true. I think you'd have to have some pretty dang good pasture if you're going to just be grazing them for a whole summer on an acre. It always helps me to think an acre is roughly the same size as a football field with the end zones cut off. So I'm a very visual person, so hopefully that helps you kind of picture what an acre looks like. But we have a 5-acre farm here, and with the pasture we have, plus kind of grazing the odd bits, we can definitely go the whole summer without needing to supplement hay. So that's something you want to figure in, and also just making sure your animal has enough space for what you feel like is appropriate. They're big animals. They're used to moving and grazing and having them kind of in a more confined situation. That's really not sort of what I want for my cows, and you have to determine if that's what you're comfortable with for yours if you don't have sort of that grazing space. Now, as you're considering that grazing space, you should also be considering if it has space for a friend, because cows, they are herd animals. They need to have a companion of some kind. It does not have to be a cow. It can be other animals. I will caution you, horses oftentimes can be real jerks to cows, so just keep that in mind. Not always, but often, from what I have seen and heard from other people, even in our own little herd, the horses were not nice to the cows, and it was very frustrating to watch. So, but sheep, we've had sheep with our cows. I actually, Juneberry, my main cow, when her mother passed away and June was by herself, I went and got her a couple of basically pet sheep to keep her company. She loved those sheep. She just adored them. She actually had some kids were chasing the sheep around once in the pasture, and she chased the kids up a tree because she didn't want them by her sheep and harassing her sheep. So you can definitely have different species as companions, but please plan to have some sort of a companion for your cow so they're not lonesome. The next thing we want to make sure we're considering is fencing. Fencing it's endless. It is endless. It doesn't matter how nice your fence is. You're always dealing with fencing. If you're doing electric fencing, that's pretty affordable to get into, but of course then you have to make sure, that your fence charger is working properly and hasn't, shorted out or something like that. You have to make sure that your fences are clear, doesn't have too much brush or stuff getting on there, or a tree limb hasn't fallen on it, etc. All things I have had happen before. So electric is a great option. If you're going to be doing almost all their fencing with even like a woven electric you can use for cattle, you can certainly use just kind of a reel of electric wire, running that out for your cows. If you're going to use electric, I highly recommend that you still have one solid pen for them. So that way, if something does happen with your electric kind of major, like let's say your charger, your energizer goes out and you aren't able to go and get a new one, you have somewhere temporarily that you can physically keep that animal from escaping and running around the neighborhood. So I really recommend at least one solid legitimate fence thing if you're doing electric. Of course, there's other options like barbed wire, cattle panels, high tensile electric wire, which is always, I love high tensile. It looks so beautiful. It's so impressive to me, but definitely on the pricier side to invest in. Fencing is going to be a pretty legitimate cost, and we will be interviewing some folks about fencing in season 2 and talking about costs and kind of options there. But so making sure you have solid fencing in place before you bring your cow home is also super important. Another thing to consider is feed costs. This is really going to vary hugely depending on where you live. Up where I am in kind of northwestern Minnesota, a square bale, a real good hefty square bale of sort of mixed grasses, this year is only $6. We've seen as high as $8, but I have seen some folks I know down in the southern part of the country where it's drier and they're having to ship in hay and things like that. You're looking at $20 a square bale, and I can't even imagine how you can afford to have a milk cow with those kind of prices. That's got to be so tough. So making sure you understand what the cost of hay is if you're going to choose to supplement with some grain and minerals and things like that, and knowing what that cost is going to be up front. And for me, with our Jersey girl, Jerseys will typically eat anywhere between 30 and 40 pounds of hay a day, and our bales are 60-pound bales. So she'll go through about 3/4 of a bale. She's also a bigger Jersey. She's not very petite, so she goes through a fair amount of hay. So that's something you really want to make sure that you are figuring out what are hay prices in your area. And also, it's not a bad idea to lock in a hay person. I usually say a hay guy because it tends to be guys. Lock in a hay guy as soon as possible. Get your winter hay reserved. The earlier, the better. You're going to pay less for hay earlier than you're going to pay for it later. But that, again, that's probably a whole other episode talking about hay. So know where you're going to get your feed and how much it's going to cost you. This one might sound a little bit silly, but making sure that you are comfortable around large animals. Now, I had a great experience where when I was in 4th grade, I got to go to a riding stable after school and muck out the stalls and help with chores around it because I was a horse crazy kid. And so from a very young age, what are you, like 8, maybe 9 in 4th grade, I got to help out with these huge animals when I was just this little tiny kid. So I became very comfortable around big animals fast. My husband, God love him, is not quite is comfortable around them because he never spent that time or grew up around them, and he's just a little more uneasy, doesn't understand like how to move them, all that kind of stuff. So that's not to say you can't get used to it or comfortable with it, but cows are big animals. They can kill you. That's something else to keep in mind. A goat, you're going to be more hard pressed to be killed by a goat, but a cow, one well-placed kick can do you in. Horns can do you in. There's being run over. Like there's a lot of things. Cows are, a good cow isn't really a danger, but there is a certain risk factor with cows. So if you are not comfortable with that, if you don't think you could become comfortable around a big animal like that, then that's something you should really consider. Try and spend some time around cows if you can to make sure that that's something that you are going to be comfortable with. Next thing on the list is manure management. Now, depending on how much acreage you have, for us, we don't have to deal with manure management too much. Our cows are out moving around on pasture. They're spreading their manure. We have free-range chickens. They are out there helping us with that process. So it's not something that we have to deal with too entirely much here. But if you have a more confined situation, if your cow's in the barn more often or things like that, you are going to have a lot of manure to deal with. You're going to have to move that manure around. So you're going to need, we're a pretty lo-fi farm here. We've got wheelbarrows and scoops. But you are going to have to then put it somewhere. It's going to have to go somewhere to become wonderful compost. That might be an enterprise too. You can, if you get it, nice and hot enough and stuff, you can sell your own compost from your cow or, fill your own raised beds like we do here. There's lots of great things you can do with it, but you have to be able to potentially move it somewhere, and somewhere on your farm it's going to have to live. So that's something just to keep in mind, is you're going to have a lot of poop to deal with. Another important thing is that if you want milk from a cow, they need to be bred. And so going forward, you're going to need to have either access to a bull, which is, I think, the trickier option, or you need to have someone who can come and AI your animal for you. So there's a couple options there we'll talk about in the future, but you might want to look for dairy farmers in the area who have decent sized herds. They probably do their own AI. They might be willing to come out and AI for you, depending on where you live. Where I am, we are well within a select sire service area. So we have a select sires rep, and he just comes out and takes care of AI for us. But that's something you will need to locate and figure out how you're going to deal with that, is getting your cow bred back when you want to have milk in the future. The next consideration we have is milk. Cows give a lot of milk. And at first, it's very exciting. You've got all this beautiful liquid gold. It's just incredible. Tastes great. You're making yogurt. You're making cheese. You're drinking a lot. You're skimming the cream. You're making ice cream. It's just this milk bonanza. And then all of a sudden, you don't have room in your fridge for anything else. And you're slightly concerned that your refrigerator shelves are going to crack and break under the weight of all the milk. So you need to make sure that you are prepared to handle that milk, store that milk, sell that milk, whatever you're going to do with it, you need to make sure that you are prepared for a lot of it. It's going to vary how much you get from your cow depending on calf sharing, depending on what kind of cow you have. We are to the point with Juneberry where we get around a gallon a day for milking, which is plenty for me and my family to use and make some very simple cheeses with. Other folks I'm seeing, they're getting 8 gallons a day from one cow, and I can't even fathom 8 gallons a day. It just stresses me out. So that's something you really want to pay attention to, is you're going to have a lot of milk, and what are you going to do with all that wonderful milk? Another consideration that you want to have is for your hay. You want to make sure that you have a plan in place for where you are going to store your hay. If you're getting square bales or round bales, if you have round bales you're getting, you typically have to be able to move them around yourself. If you're getting square bales, do you have space to get your whole year's worth of hay? We're lucky we can do that. Hay's kind of just done in one day. A guy drops it off. We're set for a whole year. But you might not have that, and then you'll have to either have someone who's willing to store the hay for you, and you just go pick it up as you need it, or you might have to store your hay at friends' houses if the people you're buying it from want to get it out of their hay shed or whatever. Where you're going to keep your hay and how you're going to keep your hay out of the elements is really something to think about. Another consideration is, where are you going to milk your cow? I've seen videos of people out milking their cow just in the pasture. That looks lovely. My cow would completely peace out and just walk away. So where are you going to tie your cow or stanchion your cow so that you can milk, preferably somewhere out of the elements? Does that place have what you need for the sort of milking you want to do? If you're just milking into a bucket, it's not that complicated. But if you're using a milker, do you have electricity? Do you have water for cleaning your milk machine? Are you going to haul that up to the barn? How are you going to handle all that sort of stuff? Another consideration is shelter. Now, beef cows, you see them just kind of hanging out in whatever sort of elements, and they seem to do pretty well so long as they have a windbreak and somewhere that is, somewhat warm to lie down, or at least somewhere that's insulated, a nice big straw pile. But your dairy girls are a little more particular. I would recommend at the very least having a 3-sided shelter that they can get out of the elements, out of the rain, out of the wind, with some nice deep bedding. So making sure you have some sort of a shelter plan for your animals. And also, as we have already talked about, manure management, remembering that you're going to have to clean that sucker out at some point as well. Now, most folks like me, we do a homestead dairy family milk cow situation because we like to have the flexibility eventually to be able to calf share so that we can skip a milking if we want to, do once a day milking, all those sort of things that make having a milk cow fit into your life better. You can absolutely do that with a milk cow. That's a wonderful thing about them. However, there's going to be a few months after your cow freshens where you need to be milking twice a day. Again, I've seen folks keep talking about forums, but that's part of the big reason why I made this podcast, is I was about to lose my mind in the forums. You see people who say, "Oh, our cow's about to freshen, and can I skip a few days?" It's no, you cannot skip a few days. You are going to get, that poor cow's going to get mastitis pretty much right away from when your cow has their calf. You start milking twice a day because they have been bred over the centuries to have more milk than they need, way more than that calf is going to drink. And so you are going to have to be milking morning and night for, at least in my experience with my cow, it'll vary a lot depending on your cow, your breed, etc. The first probably 2 months, it's twice a day milking. And then at that point, I've been able to then drop down to once a day milking. But even then, you still have to keep up that once a day milking for probably another month at least. So by the time your calf is around 3-4 months, the calf can probably cover all the milk, but you definitely have a big chunk of time where either you're milking or someone else has to be milking. So if you can't commit to that milking, but you have a neighbor who wants to do it with you or a friend who is able to do it, that's fantastic. But that's something you really need to consider is, can you commit to that chunk of time that you are going to be there, or you have someone else who is comfortable and capable to come and milk for you? All right, so I think that about covers the most important things I think you should be considering before you get a cow. I'm sure there's other things that I have missed. Make sure you hop onto the Milkmaid Brigade over on Facebook as our private community, our private group where we have discussions. So if you have any kind of thoughts about this episode, please head over there. Otherwise, I'll make sure I link to the show notes in the description so you can head on over to the blog to get some more resources and information there. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Family Milk Cow Podcast. You can become a part of the Family Milk Cow Podcast by joining the Milkmaid Brigade, sponsoring an episode, or following along on social media. You can find links for all these and more, including show notes, at familymilkcowpodcast.com. If you love what you're hearing, please rate, review, subscribe, and turn on those automatic downloads. One of the best ways to support this show is simply by sharing it. And as always, make sure to give your girl down in the barn a good scratch behind the ears from me.